Welcome to CanAg Unpacked. Back with us today is Wayne Easter, a 28-year veteran of the House of Commons, Canada's top cop as Solicitor General under Jean Chrétien, and a longtime chair of the House of Commons Finance Committee. I should also say he is a former president of the Canadian National Farmers Union. Welcome, Wayne. And we've got Jack Wilkinson, a tour de force in Canadian agricultural policy, former president of the Canadian Federation of Agriculture, former president of the Ontario Federation of Agriculture, former president of the International Federation of Agricultural Producers, and just retired as director on the Canadian Cooperators. Our special guest today is American National Farmers Union President Rob Larew, and of course Wayne probably knows the National Farmers Union in the U.S. well. I know Jack and I, when we were president of the Canadian Federation of Agriculture, worked very closely with the National Farmers Union. Philosophically, we seem to be fairly close together. In fact, I believe it was you, Jack, that at a North American EU farm leaders meeting in Belgium, up to that point, it had always just been the American Farm Bureau that showed up at those meetings. You invited the NAEU meeting to Canada and announced in that room that you were also going to invite the National Farmers Union from the U.S. And there were some disgruntled, sarcastic comments from some of the other participants, but we got it done, and so that was great. I worked a lot with Dave Fredrickson. I'm sure you know him, Rob. Dave actually was irritated at me, I think, only once. And we're going to talk about that later when we come to trade. But we should get moving. I told your staff, Rob, that I knew everybody on this podcast today loved the microphone. So we have to get moving so we can get it done in decent time. Rob, can you tell us a little bit about the National Farmers Union in the U.S.?
Yeah, no, thanks. And it's really good to be with all of you here. So National Farmers Union in the U.S. Was originally founded in 1902 and was really kind of formed out of a group of angry farmers in Texas who were looking at all the power and control of the railroads, of the banks, and all the big monopolies, and was looking for ways to kind of increase farmers' not only power but also voice in the system. And so that was also some of the early development in the U.S. of farmer-owned cooperatives as well. But we continue to be the second largest general farm organization here in the country. You made reference to the Farm Bureau. Because there's too few of us in agriculture these days, we end up working very, very closely with a lot of our colleagues throughout the farm groups. I'm sure that there are similarities in Canada. And we track all the things that you would expect, everything from the federal policy to grassroots issues in our individual state organizations. But we certainly have a lot to keep us busy these days.
Yeah. Jack or Wayne?
This would be probably long ago, probably 35, 40 years ago. I had been at an NFU convention in the U.S. The NFU is quite different from the NFU in the United States, as was said earlier. Your policies and approaches closer to the Canadian Federation of Agriculture. But regardless of the farm organization, they're there to work in the farmer's interest, help the primary producer to see that there's proper return on investment and capital, and work in their interest in policy. So the name doesn't matter as much as the leadership and getting the job done for farm communities. I even forget. I believe the meeting was in Denver that I was at, but I still remember that. But a long time ago.
Just for what it's worth, Bob, with the 6 years that I was the international president, the National Farmers Union was very active internationally. We really added to the policy discussion and was really supportive of the organization. So it was great working with your leadership and senior staff at the time. So pleasure to see you.
Well, and you've done a lot of international work, Jack, as president of the International Federation of Agriculture Producers. I'd like you to comment on that a little bit later. But Rob, what sort of international work do you guys do?
Yeah, so we continue to be very active on a lot of fronts. We continue to be active, although not formally, in the North American EU meetings, and really appreciate, again, a lot of cooperation with the Farm Bureau to help facilitate our engagement there, with the support of the Canadians and the Europeans. That's been very useful. Our primary engagement is with the World Farmer Organization now, is what they're called, and we, along with the CFA, represent the North American constituency in that. Currently, the board member from that region is the CFA president, so Keith Curry is there and does an excellent job representing those interests. It's just too important. All of our issues, as much as you can have those local issues, I think can feel a little parochial and so forth. There are so many forces, whether it's the changing climate, trade discussions, food security broadly. You have to have these global conversations. And so we look for opportunities wherever we can. We have regular conversations with IECA. So you have the North and South American engagement there as well. There's even a little bit of a subgroup now from the World Farmer Organizations, those representing G7 countries came together with a joint statement of position ahead of last year's G7 meeting, which was hosted by Italy. Canada is hosting the G7 meetings this summer, and we're currently working to hopefully have a joint statement of position to offer to the leaders who will be attending.
Perfect.
Jack, when you were president of IFAP, in fact, I was telling someone the other day, my guess was that you spent most of your expense account visiting developing countries. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, from a membership point of view and kind of a workload point of view, after the World Trade talks were over, Bob, there was a lot of work being done with developing countries. We had, just shy of 100 member organizations. We had a major development program with the Dutch government. So that allowed us to help work with developing countries to build capacity on trade, on all sorts of issues. And many of those countries, you did get complaints sometimes from the developed world that foot the bill, mainly speaking, as to whether this was inappropriate. My view always was, if you want a stable world, you need to have agriculture production all around the world. You need to have them, it's one thing to say we're opening out markets, but if they don't have any of the phytosanitary, any of the traceability, any of the other items available to them as producers, their product doesn't go anywhere. So you've said you've opened a market and in fact done nothing. So a lot of the International Federation work was helping them understand the trade agreements, what they had to do to meet phytosanitary health regulations, what they had to do in relationship to traceability for countries they were going to do trade in. And in many of these places, Bob, all of you would know, they really have very little support from their national government when it comes to agriculture, in particular small-scale producers. So you're helping to build co-ops, so all the peanut growers in a particular country know that they've got product available, graded available, packaged available, and ready to ship. And they're getting none of that from government. So I think it's a long-standing issue. You try and help countries maximize whatever economic activity they can as producers so they can improve the situation. It's really hard to imagine when you have these countries like a Kenya where you have a $300 school tax. So unless that family can raise $300 net over just living, their children aren't going to go to school. That has since disappeared, but things like that exist in many countries. Many countries have import duties as high as 300% on fertilizer. So for a farmer wanting to buy fertilizer, the government's getting 300% top up for their tax bill and the farmer can't afford to buy. So all of these issues, if you've only lived in one country and only talked to the government in one country, you think that's normal. Once you get out and about, start talking to farmers at other international meetings and realize what they've had to do for their success, that changes the world.
You might be interested to know, Rob, Wayne Easter didn't have enough challenges spending 28 years in Ottawa, and so he decided to go out and start a potato project in war-torn Ukraine. So talk about international work, that would certainly qualify. Tell us a little bit about the farm economy in the U.S., Rob.
A great deal of uncertainty. I think that's fair to start off, right? Uh, uh, Grain markets have been suppressed. I think there's it's a little hard to predict right now where they're ultimately going to go because we have some positive news in terms of stocks, global stocks for some of the grains tightening a little bit, which might create a stronger market. But then you have the competing uncertainty of the tariff situation and where that's ultimately going to go. And I think we can all agree that at least recent announcements about tariffs on or off or maybe just heightens that big question mark for what might be coming. So we have that, but then we have other sectors. I think a lot of the animal protein sectors are doing okay, particularly the beef market. But I'm always quick to say that for our cattle guys, they're having some strong returns right now, but this is paying for all of the losses that they suffered there before. So it's a little bit of a mixed bag. If you're in a state like Oklahoma and you have a combination of crops and cattle and so forth, one is helping to cover the other. But uncertainty is just driving everything right now. I think our projected farm income for this year is expected to come up, but that's in large part because there are disaster payments and economic loss payments coming out of the government. And so, obviously, ideally, we'd love to see increased income coming from the marketplace.
How much of your typically how much of your agricultural production is exported?
Well, it really depends on the commodity here, right? But I think the general number is, only like 20%. But when you look at wheat, right, it's the vast majority. When you look at soybeans, the majority of those beans. So in terms of the major crops, we are extraordinarily dependent on exports.
Just if I could come in, Bob, for a minute there on Rob's point. I think he made certainly outlined the problems in the farm community with the markets and some of the political situations, but that Rob is just why it's so critical. I'm so glad to hear that you are going to make a presentation or getting information to the G7 because it's one thing for the four of us in terms of coming from agriculture and basically understanding it. I can tell you as finance chair in Canada that 70% of your cabinet ministers in this country don't understand agriculture at all. And too many of the Congress folks, senators, parliamentarians here believe as far as farming, well, I just go to the grocery store and I pick it up. And that's about what they know. So it's absolutely critical that you get your points to the G7 because many of these ministers do not understand the basics of agriculture, let alone what tariffs and some of these other issues that you mentioned are doing to us now. I just wanted to mention as well on the beef industry. One of the most integrated industries in agriculture between Canada and U.S. is the beef industry. I chair the board of a small federally inspected plant here in Prince Edward Island. We kill roughly 750 a week, so we're just a little minion compared to Cargill and some others. But as a result of what happened in China and United States been shut out of China on mainly beef, China's not inspecting, I think, some 400 plants in U.S. right now, so they can't ship to China even if they could come in over the tariffs. And so as a result, we just opened up a market in Japan. Well, now American product is being dumped into Japan, and it's affecting our returns for a market that we just opened. So it's affecting us, but it's also affecting you, because those products on the international market now, to get rid of them, are being dumped. And I hear what you're saying about the industry in terms of where prices are at now. They're where they should be, but on the plant side, they're too high, and plants are losing money. So it's a complicated issue.
Jack?
The one thing that really worries me is this is starting to get some signals of where we were before we entered into the WTO, when everybody, country by country, was dumping their surplus on international markets. Trade patterns were moving all over the place. I mean, depending on how good of imagination you've got, let's assume nobody ships anything to China out of the United States for the next 6 months. What's going to happen to soybean prices? What's going to happen to beef prices? What's going to happen to a number of commodities? Wayne just described how disruption in a third-party country occurs, has impact on somebody who's established there. That was where we started off many, many years ago with the European Union and the United States exporting with export subsidies, fighting over market share in various countries. And the rest of us who didn't have farm income support suffered greatly. I think this shows clearly the need for organized world trade. I'm not saying zero tariff world trade. I mean, that day may be gone. I don't know. But we need organization. We need rules. People need to know that when they invest in a market, that they're going to be there. That we're not you take the Canadian. We've had lentils that have had prohibitive tariffs put on by India. Yellow peas. We've had tariffs put on canola. We've had tariffs put on various other commodities. And all of a sudden, what was your number one market just disappears overnight, and the chaos. We're at a bit of a disadvantage, the Canadian farmers. We don't get the type of farm income support that you gentlemen enjoy in the United States. I don't take that away from you, but it does affect farmers drastically different depending on which country you're operating in. And it's not a good news scenario for the long run, because this has a tendency of getting out of control.
Bob, I want to come back to Jack's point, and it emphasizes Rob's point in terms of getting a message to the G7, because governments make decisions, and our government in this country made a decision based on the United States position on electric vehicles and China bringing electric vehicles in. So, U.S. put a tariff on China on electric vehicles coming in. We followed suit with the U.S. to partly accommodate President Trump and to greatly accommodate protecting our EV auto industry. Who got sideswiped by that decision? The agricultural industry in Canada. Canola now is basically by tariffs shut out of the market. So we're impacted very, very negatively on canola, on peas, on pork, because of a government decision to support the automobile EV industry, and that's what ministers have to understand. Auto may have a big voice, but there's real impact on others when you're protecting that industry at the expense of us.
Yeah, and that's a multi-billion-dollar export market for us, spanning over those commodities that you just mentioned, Wayne. The other thing, we have a very integrated industry, Rob, right, between Canada and the U.S., and that's actually the one time that Frederickson got irritated at me, because I think we were at an IFAB meeting that the NFU hosted in the U.S., and Dave wanted to try to get the convention to support country of origin labeling. And coming from Canada, we just couldn't do it because of our integrated industries. I mean, you're talking about segregation, huge costs in segregation, et cetera. And so we just couldn't support that. Where is that at with country of origin labeling in the U.S. now?
Yeah. I assumed that this issue would come up at some point here, right? So National Farmers Union continues to strongly support mandatory country of origin labeling. Certainly, I think if there's a context or a flavor to it now that perhaps is a little bit different, it's recognizing that it needs to meet international rules. And so there's a little bit of a nuance there. The active bill in the Senate right now is led by the majority leader from South Dakota, John Thune, and we're seeing additional support. I don't expect that we'll see action anytime real soon on this, but it certainly continues to be an issue that our members want to make sure keep front and center. Notwithstanding the integration point that you make, I think we certainly recognize that. We recognize the impact, whether we're talking about the hogs or cattle, or there's so many spaces here where that's true. Conversely, we also support the Canadian dairy system, which gets a little bit of protection there, which the U.S. government position doesn't support, and certainly wants to see changes there with dairy, eggs, and poultry in the quotas. And so, our message, tries to be centered back on, what is in the best interest of our growers, and certainly our dairy farmers, of which I'm glad I can say I'm a former dairy farmer, so my mornings are a little bit better than they used to be. But I think that there's room for discussion there, and certainly it's a message that we take to our government leaders, that let's not bring Canadian dairy farmers down to the same challenges that our members are facing here. Let's find ways to improve conditions for our dairy farmers.
The dairy issue is an interesting one. Trump loves talking about the 250% tariff we have on dairy products, right? Someone needs to whisper in his ear that currently they're not even filling the TRQ that they have, which is free. There's no tariff inside the TRQ. Jack, you had something?
No, I mean, to that point, but where do you see this unfolding from the ag policy discussions you're having in relationship to the trade talks? And let's say we move the NAFTA-CUSA agreement ahead with negotiations. I mean, how are your farmers looking at that? Do they see any opportunities? Part of the problem I'm having problem understanding is Trump did sign off on the 2018 agreement, said it was the best deal that had ever been written, and he signed it, and now he wants to renegotiate. We're having a little problem from a Canadian context of a sense of, will a new agreement change the discussion, or will we be faced with kind of the erratic tariff on and off regardless? Do you have a sense of that?
No, it's the short answer. And to be clear, I on the earlier point, I am not close enough to be able to whisper into President Trump's ear. That said, leading up to some of the tariff deadlines and the retaliatory tariffs and so forth, I mean, we pretty aggressively, along with Farm Bureau and others, really tried to publicly talk about the impact that was already being felt. In some ways, the uncertainty kind of driving up input costs and so forth. But the challenge that this was going to have to U.S. farmers. I like to think that some of the decision on the pause was kind of that voice being heard, but we still have a lot of work ahead of us. I think that the more that we can do, not only domestically but in these international conversations, like with the G7 and other. The more that we can talk about transparency, that we can talk about the rules, but we have a very weakened WTO system, an even weaker dispute settlement process right now for a lot of reasons. And so there's just so many challenges there. I would say that our members who are really diverse, and you have some who are really supportive of this administration and those who didn't support them. But I think, obviously we want to see some success generally for the U.S. Agriculture system. And so to the extent that this erratic behavior, on again, off again, leads to some serious negotiation, even outside the confines of the WTO, it may not be perfect, but at least it will hopefully get some issues going for, resolved because of, all the disruption it's causing. This isn't good for anyone. This was one of the early messages that we delivered when the first tariffs went on. Is you know, family farmers and ranchers lose in these trade wars, regardless of where they're at. So if we're looking north to our Canadian neighbors or Mexico or the Europeans or elsewhere, it is in everyone's best interest to have greater coordination, being strategic, transparent, and having some rules that we're following.
Jack, you want to
Just a
respond?
quick follow-up. It would seem to me, though, there's a limited amount of gain in the North American discussions versus, and I don't see ever getting a world discussion again, but I mean, your soybean producers aren't worried about Canadian production, it's Brazil, and we can go through the list of commodities. And so I get a little bit nervous if people have expectations of a new set of discussions that might be a bit unrealistic considering the global movement between Argentina, Brazil, and a few other major players that are really, what they do has a bigger impact on price, and I guess what the U.S. dollar, where it's sitting, has probably a bigger impact than just about anything else.
Well, and I think part of the other challenge here, I think we all recognize the fact that while agriculture through certain viewpoints, it gets a fair amount of attention and so forth. Within the 10,000-foot view, you have all these other discussions coming in, fentanyl, whether or not that's in drug trade and human trafficking issues. Regardless of the size of the challenge there, it is an issue that the White House and the administration has been pushing hard. And it's hard for me to look at that, larger context and know and predict where they're going to go. So at least as a farm organization, we just try to drive home the importance of the Canadian and Mexican markets, and the impacts of any changes there, and hope that someone's listening.
Wayne,
I think what's being related to here is the excessive amount of uncertainty that's there right now, and there's no question, Rob. We all know as former farm leaders that you're going to have views within your organization on the extremes of both sides, and you got to try and find some compromise in the middle if you can at all. I'm a former dairy producer as well, so I went at a dairy in around 2000. And that's one thing that our supply management system does. It gives you considerable certainty in the industry that your returns are gonna meet your costs and your investment. I did want to make a point on U.S. policy on its own. Now, there's one thing I really like about how you at the federal level develop farm policy. I may disagree with the policy, but the U.S. Farm Bill. I used to be pretty good friends with Colin Peterson, who used to chaired Canada US for quite a number of years, the group of parliamentarians between both countries. So I was a chair on this side. He was a chair on the American side. And he also chaired the Agriculture Committee. But you have intense discussions on the Farm Bill itself, which opens up everything from food and the food policy to you name it. And I think it gets the issue out there in a better form than we do in Canada. Ours comes through the agriculture minister to the Department of Finance eventually, and policy is established. But at least yours is a full range discussion on where you want to go.
Well, thank you for the comments there. And in full disclosure, if folks weren't aware, I actually served as Colin Peterson's staff director at the House Agriculture Committee for a number of years. And we could really use another Colin Peterson right now.
Sure could.
Maybe another dynamic to talk about in the U.S. right now in the federal level is the lack of engagement in many ways by the legislative branch. We have our three branches, right? Legislative, the executive, and judicial, and we're seeing the courts weighing in on some of the things, but it's still trying to get its grip. We have strong response from the executive, from the White House, and very little kind of oversight and engagement that is not directly in line with the executive branch. So that kind of independence is lacking in ways that we haven't seen in a long time. I think that's going to begin to change, but we need to make sure that happens. I think it's useful on the tariff conversation because Congress constitutionally here in the U.S. has a role in assigning tariffs, but we've kind of capitulated to the legislative branch has yielded to the White House. There's an effort by Senator Chuck Grassley of Iowa to try to gather enough support to reinstate Congress's authority there. I think that while that might still lead to similar outcomes, having additional voices in that conversation, I just think helps us all along. Part of the challenge with getting a farm bill done now is that there is so much energy being used up by a tax and budget bill right now, and by the trade conversations and other of the president's priorities. And there's just very little space for farm bill discussions. Some of those things are moving right now on this tax bill. We'll see where that goes, but that leaves a whole, the rest of that coalition, that broad coalition on food and farm policy. There's still a great deal of work that isn't included. It's a little challenging for me to see exactly how that's going to yet be finished this summer. The agriculture committees, I think, are committed to it, but there is so much competition from other priorities right now.
Speaking of Congress and the administration, this is something that puzzled me when Trump talks about 90 trade deals that he's going to make. Isn't the Congress, don't they have the authority? Are they not the authority on approval or rejection of trade agreements?
They are, but there has been this yielding of a lot of the negotiation authority to the administration. So I think you've seen this executive now in operation during the first term and now in the second term. And in this term, I mean, he is certainly, I think, most kind of scholars that track this stuff, see the executive branch trying to stretch their authority into the space where judiciary and the courts and in the legislative side. We've certainly seen it in some respects in the past. Most recent big example was far back to Nixon, but until we kind of get a recentering of that balance of power between Congress, the executive branch, and judiciary, I think we're going to continue to see these kind of bombastic kind of claims of moves that hopefully will be challenged so that we can restore some balance.
Bob, I want to mention how critical Rob's point is on Congress. I'm really good friends with Senator Grassley as well. I've known him for 25 years. I actually went down the Mississippi River on the Bella Queen with him, so we had 3 days together at one point in time. But if it wouldn't have been for Chuck in the Kuzma negotiation, it was his input, I believe, in the last 2 hours of those discussions with Trump and company that got the deal done. He was absolutely critical because he understood some of the positions on the Canadian side, and what the last item on the table was, in fact, supply management. And it was Chuck's pressure at the very end that I believe made that deal possible, that Trump at least once said it was the best deal ever signed.
Okay, we're running out of time, but there's two very quick issues I'd like to cover if we could. I don't know if they'll be quick. I know Jack wants to get back on the tractor. Thank you very much, Jack, for coming in off the field and joining us today. Are your farmers already feeling pain from this trade war that's been created by the administration?
Yeah, I think broadly, we certainly hear a lot of anecdotal stories of I kind of alluded to it earlier, but some of the input and chemical companies are building in a buffer into their price in anticipation of either supply chain disruptions or additional tariffs, whatever those challenges might be. They're trying, from a business point of view, to try to, create a little bit of a margin there for them. And our members are having to kind of pay for that. So yeah, I think the other impact is the fact that this is separate from the tariff stuff, but USDA is freezing a lot of programs, eliminating a lot of programs without congressional input. And that's their prerogative, perhaps, but I think that we, again, need to have that congressional input. And we also have a huge number of USDA staff who are out in the field, intended to give farmers technical assistance, who are also now out of a job.
One thing I've been informed of, Rob, is the impact the loss of U.S. aid. Now, I've worked with USAID in Ukraine, some because, as was said earlier, we are growing potatoes there, myself and some other colleagues. But I'm told that USAID purchased about $2 billion worth of farm products in the United States, and that market at the moment seems to be lost. I don't know whether it's false information or right information, but I believe it to be true.
So, particularly for sorghum, pulse crops, rice, that is certainly been a hit.
Jack, anything?
Well, the one thing that we talked about in a previous program, Bob, was the change in attitude and support coming from sort of phytosanitary vaccine research, a host of issues that are under Kennedy's mandate, and what that might mean for future veterinarian products, vaccine products, a host of things that, avian flu was one topic that was concerned as to the traceability of animals moving around the United States and not having program support. So do you see that becoming a problem as time goes on, in particular when we're talking about exporting internationally and not having kind of the system behind it like you used to always have, one of the strongest systems in the world?
Yes, I think that I want to be a little cautious, but I think it's one of the bright spot areas, and that is that there is very, very broad support within the ag community, and we have strong support in Congress to make sure that science drives those decisions, and that we continue to have the resources in place. There were some hiccups in early decisions from this administration in removing resources from avian influenza monitoring and other disease monitoring, and there was strong pushback from the ag space. So I think they're trying to remedy that. That said, today actually is the day that we're expected to see a report coming out from Secretary Kennedy. The so-called MAHA Commission is issuing the report on chronic disease. There's going to be looking at what's the reference in there to agricultural use of innovations, including chemicals and so forth. So a lot of attention's being focused on there. We hope we have an ally in USDA and EPA, and we'll have to stay tuned to see what Secretary Kennedy says.
All right, my last point then, Rob. I mean, one of the reasons we always liked the WTO was because that was the place where countries could be disciplined with regard to their domestic spending in agriculture, domestic support. As far as trade agreements is concerned, Canada has been very aggressive in bilateral and plurilateral agreements or regional agreements, but we still like the WTO for discipline on domestic support. Do you see any future for the WTO in the near term under this administration?
I don't. I can't speak very positive if from the perspective of the administration. I mean, when you have leaders in the White House who have worked very aggressively in the first Trump administration to further weaken the WTO, and in particular by not kind of agreeing to uh, um, putting folks onto the dispute panel. Um, I think that you have an administration who sees that as a barrier and a challenge, and I don't expect that to necessarily change. I think those of us in ag who want to continue to see additional new markets develop, and basically, existing markets being able to be navigated. Um, I, I think you'll continue to hear a lot of the ag groups refer to kind of rules-based transparency. Um, there's a recent statement on trade that the World Farmer Organization put out from their board in response to all the trade disruption, and it speaks to all of these issues, trying to make sure that there is certainty out there while also respecting sovereignty.
Okay, anything else, Jack or Wayne?
No, I just underline the last point there. I really do believe for farmers everywhere, including in the United States and Canada, we are in a global trading environment. As Jack said earlier, what Brazil does, what Argentina does, what China does, has an impact on us no matter where we live in the globe in these times. And so a rules-based global system, I really do believe to be critical, and there has to be discipline in that system. I know that's not the way that Trump is looking at it. I'm worried that the United States is starting to isolate itself from the rest of the world on more areas than just agriculture. But the bottom line for me is we need to be still striving towards a rules-based global system.
Jack, anything else?
Nope, we're good. Nice to meet
Well,
you. Take care.
Rob, unless you have something else,
No, this has been a great conversation. Thanks.
thank you so much for joining us on this. Thanks to Wayne, Jack, and thanks to you, Rob, as well. And hopefully we will talk again soon.
Take care.
Take care. Good
All
luck
right.
down there, Rob.
Yeah,
Thanks.
good luck with everything, Rob. Your job isn't easy.